Welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone who's here and everyone who's watching on YouTube later. This is our December 14th, 2023 Accounting Alchemy Network Social Forum Lyceum around the recent JEDI program that we did a pilot for. And I'm super excited that we've got some of our participants from that pilot program in the room and also members who have not gotten to participate. So we've got both sides of questions and ideas of people who were there. As we're diving into this conversation, we would love to dive in with our usual accounting alchemy grounding and setting intentional space for this call. So before we dive into a round of introductions, I want to invite everyone, whether you're here or watching the replay, to go ahead and close your eyes or lower your gaze, whatever feels good to you, or soften your gaze if you're driving. Try to make sure that you're paying attention to the road if you're listening to this in the car. And take some nice deep breaths in through the nose and releasing any stress or tension that we might be holding down into the earth beneath us. And on the next breath, sending extra love and awareness to any area of the body that needs it. And releasing down, down, down into the earth beneath us. Maybe even pushing our feet into the floor. And on this next breath, feeling gratitude for the air we get to breathe. For the spark of life that is the fire within us, for the waters in and all around us, and for this beautiful earth holding us to her with her gravity like a perpetual hug. And returning our breath to whatever cadence feels natural to you, still breathing deeply, reminding ourselves that our bodies like to feel breath fully expanding us, and that often we breathe more shallowly than is good for us. Allowing our stomach to rise and fall with our breath, and allowing ourselves to arrive fully in our bodies in this place and time. Releasing anything that we were doing before this meeting, releasing anything that we've got coming up after, so that we can bring our full attention to the important conversation that we get to have with each other today. Recognizing in this moment that some of the topics that we get to talk about are some of the biggest, most important topics facing our world at this time, and that those topics can bring up challenging emotional experiences within us. And thus it is even more important for us to really connect with our bodies, with our emotional state, grounding and allowing ourselves to recognize that this container is intended to be a space where all of our thoughts and emotions can be brought up without judgment and looked at in a supportive environment and unpacked as we come together to endeavor to create a world where everyone can feel belonging, where everyone's needs are met, developing safer, more effective workplaces, and really taking a close look at our limiting beliefs, particularly the social constructs that we've been trained into since childhood, that we often don't get the chance to question, that this is a safe place to do that. And giving ourselves a moment to expand our awareness, to include the ecosystems all around us, recognizing that we are part of the nature that we are surrounded by. Acknowledging this beautiful pattern of life, the plants, animals, fungi, microbiome, the wind and rain, everything around us is alive, and we are part of that dance, part of that pattern. And as part of that pattern, we don't have to do anything to belong. and also acknowledging the indigenous peoples who have stewarded these ecosystems for millennia, and the ongoing struggle for equity and sovereignty amidst our indigenous peoples. And recognizing that while we don't have to do anything to belong, what we do choose to do has great and beautiful impact in this world. And that we can use this as an opportunity to learn how to show up in right relationship with all things and all ways, with our planet and all peoples, recognizing that our diversity is our greatest asset, our diversity of experiences, our diversity in culture, and feeling gratitude in our hearts for that diversity and for this beautiful work that we get to do together. Taking another deep breath and allowing that gratitude to fill our bodies and expand to fill the area around us. And with one more deep breath, moving our bodies in whatever way feels good to us in this moment. As we come back together on the screen with our beautiful eyes. And I'm going to bring someone in from the waiting room. Yay, welcome, Alina. We just finished our grounding. We are recording, so we are welcoming you as well as any people who are joining us on YouTube for this replay as we dive into our conversation. And I would love to dive in with a round of introductions, just kind of brief introductions. And I would love to start with you, Jana, if that's okay, as our resident D&I expert.
I always get invited to introduce myself first. I don't know why. And I always want to hear other people's introductions because then they say the things that I'm like, I wanted to say that, but I didn't. Yeah, you're
How
on
about you
that.
can go first and last? We'll let you go first, and
That's
then
okay.
we'll come back to you at the end.
That's it. So all the things I forgot. So hello, everyone. I'm Jana, ATN. I am a CPA in the recovering CPA category. I practiced in public accounting for almost 21 years or just over 21 years. Today, I work in diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging. And Ingrid, during the grounding, there were a couple things that came up. And one of them for me that popped up is empowerment. And I will say that in my work that I do, that's where I live. I live in empowerment and helping people practice what I call fearless inclusion, which is the ability to be yourself basically and create space for others to do the same, because that takes courage and it takes effort and it takes intention. And so I talk about all of that in my work. My pronouns are she, her. I have a stinky dog right underneath my desk. His name is Doug. And if you hear snoring, it's not me. I live in Maryland. I have two beautiful sons. Both of them have beautiful girlfriends. I'm married to the love of my life. And my favorite color is, can you guess? Orange. So thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here. And now do I get to pick who we turn it over to?
Sure.
So Ingrid, Brian, I'm like going around the circle. Brian, tag, you're it.
Okay, thank you, Jenna. So my name is Brian Cush. I am a CPA turned leadership coach. I worked in public accounting and serving the profession for about 14 years. For the last 15 years, I've been an executive leadership coach to the profession. One of the words Jenna mentioned was intention. I help people to become more intentional in their life. That means aligning. What do you really care about? What matters to you? What gives you meaning in this world? And then how do you align that to how you show up for others, the actions you take as a leader? I love what I do. I work for a company called Intend to Lead, and we coach accountants to access the dimension of possible. And the dimension of possible isn't based on fear or the past or how we used to do things before, because accountants, that's what we love, right? How did we do things before? The dimension of possible is about you creating your own possibilities and doing that through what you love. And let's see, I live just west of Chicago. I'll say the reason I'm here is because I feel like our profession is not as diverse as it can be. And that limits our leadership capacity, and our profession needs way better leadership than what it's getting now. And so I want to be part of that. I want to know what I'm doing to hold the diversity back, and what I can do to be a part of us getting the better leadership we need. So I will turn it over to Matthew.
All right, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are and whatever time this is for you. Matthew, I am the co-founder, one of the co-founders of the Accounting Alchemy Network. I am also the founder of a company called 10kcreators.com, where I'm serving artists and arts organizations in improving how they make and manage money. I consider it sort of an extension of my life in accounting and my life in the arts. I've worn several hats in the world of accounting, mostly as the CEO, president, and or CMO consultant or executive coach for people who work and or run small bookkeeping, controller, CFO practices. And yeah, I also enjoy the color orange. 98% of the time, it is my favorite color. There's some days when I feel more like neon yellow or hot pink are appropriate for me. But otherwise, the default tends to be orange. And yeah, I am excited for this conversation. I did not get a chance to be a part of this last JEDI cohort, though I do know you, Jana, well, and of course, Ingrid, you and I speak all the time. So I'm very eager to be here from the perspective of somebody who didn't get to experience that, but gets to ask some of those sort of foundational questions and hopefully create some inspiration and opportunity for people to attend the next iteration of JEDI training when that becomes available to them through the Accounting Alchemy Network. And so with that, I'm going to pass the ball over to you, Alina, to introduce yourself.
Hello, I am Alina Nikishina. I live in Amboy, Washington, the unceded lands of the Chinook and Cowlitz people. And my favorite color is not orange, it's actually purple. But I like that we're doing this. So I used to be a CPA, worked in public accounting with small business owners, and a few years ago, decided to switch up my career a little bit. I co-created a business where we built entrepreneurship education and helped accountants get more into being an advisor versus focusing so heavily on compliance. And then after that, went on to become a coach. So did the life coaching thing, and also then started getting into subconscious reprogramming. So got certified in hypnosis, and now I do other subconscious modalities. So that's primarily what I do now, is work with entrepreneurs to help them play in the hidden realm of things and help them transform patterns of behavior, thought, belief, and feelings that hold them back from taking action in their business and from having the kind of success that they want to have. So I'm also one of the co-founders of the Accounting Alchemy Network. You'll probably see me do a bunch of social media if you join our group. Yeah, thank you for being here.
Yay, I guess that leaves me, and I see Jana posted in the chat, purple is her number 2 color. So hi everyone, Ingrid Edstrom. My favorite color is green, and purple is also my number 2 color. And I am outside of Ashland, Oregon, on the unceded ancestral lands of the Shasta and Takelma peoples. I am the 3rd co-founder of the Accounting Alchemy Network, and my main business that I do when I'm, not just volunteering, which takes up most of my time at this point, let's be honest, is focusing on coaching, mostly with accounting professionals, but also with other businesses around leading more values-based businesses, really helping people to find their superpowers and their why and be able to express those superpowers and that why through our businesses, so that we're making an effective living, doing what we're here to do in this world and feeling that fulfillment and joy of getting to connect through our biggest passions, while also upholding our values, and making sure that we're doing it in alignment with our planet and all peoples. So that's where my main focus is. And I guess to kind of transition into a bit of our conversation, some of the volunteer work that I do has been a lot of work with the Pachamama Alliance and learning a lot about social justice and environmental activism and how those things come together to form climate justice, and really seeing how social justice is inextricably intertwined with our climate crisis and our economic issues and all of these problems that our world has, that we have rolled out in the Accounting Alchemy Network as issues to talk about and measure our progress in figuring out how to resolve. We look at those as being the 5 pillars of regenerative accounting. And so this work that we're here to do today, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, which I love to call JEDI. We are in JEDI training. And it's perpetual JEDI training. There's at no point will anybody be able to say, I'm a JEDI master, because the work that we have to do in this particular area is so big. There is always a next level of learning and growth edge. And there is a lot of deep inner work that goes along with that. And so that's one of the reasons why we are wanting to have these regular conversations. And I am still fairly new to a lot of these conversations, and defer to Jana for her diversity, equity, inclusion facilitation experience. And I bring general facilitation experience to this conversation. So I guess with that, let's talk a little bit about what we just finished a couple of weeks ago, which was a pretty monumental achievement of, hey, we created a thing, we gave it a try, and it actually went pretty well. So yeah, I would love to, well, first toss it back to you, Jana. Was there anything in the introductions that was touched on by others that you said, oh, I should have said? And then would love to hear your perspective on how the JEDI program, the thing that we made. We made a thing.
And I put in the chat, maybe we call it the JEDI journey,
Mm.
not becoming Jedis, because it's a journey, never a destination. I think, Ingrid, when we started exploring this, and I'll be completely transparent, the name was Cost of Whiteness. And that's inspired by the Pachamama's content that they put into their program, bonus content, which of course now I think should be a standalone program. And I believe in the content, I believe in the conversation. I think there is a construct of race in our country that is probably, especially given our current political landscape, the single biggest taboo. We can talk about gay marriage, we can talk about single parenting, we can talk about poverty, but we can't talk about race. And if we do talk about race, we have to talk about the minorities. Can't talk about you white people. So I think it was really important to have this conversation framed as that title. And then I got nervous about it. I got anxious because I was worried that it might be triggering, if you will, to other people. And I do this work for a living, and I didn't want to suffer the worst case scenario in my mind, which is the impact of cancel culture on my own business. So being completely transparent, that's why we said, let's call it JEDI training. But what was it really? We were having some really deep and meaningful conversations about race, specifically what is white identity? And then how does that influence all the things? And I have to say that I'm grateful for everybody who signed up to participate, because these were very brave and vulnerable conversations. There were a few tears shed. There were some people who just, had to step back and were being reactive, not in a bad way, but reacting to conversations we were having. And I learned so much myself. I walked in there, Ingrid, you keep tagging me as this DEI expert, but I'm learning. I'm growing, I'm challenging, I'm changing my mind every day, then I change it back the next day. And I hope I practice what I preach. And my goal is to teach that practice to others. So I'm going to stop talking, and I'd love to hear, I know Alina, Brian, you were there with us. I'd love to hear how you saw this going and what your thoughts were about the program in general, and then anything else you want to share. Brian, you are not on mute, so does this mean you're going to go first?
I can. Yeah, a couple thoughts come up for me. One is I get excited after having gone through this program for the program to just be wider and bigger for others. Uh, I almost see like a time where there's been a lot of people through it, and what does that mean? What does that mean for that group? What can that group do? And what does that mean for the profession? For me personally, the experience was very meaningful because I felt like, two words we talked about: education, just being more educated on some of the topics that we talked about, but also empathy, right? When you combine education and empathy, you become a little more powerful. And I just felt like there were some really amazing times throughout the program. I guess I could go anywhere with this, but where there was a little bit of a misunderstanding or someone being reactive in a way, and as the group formed and created more safety, psychological safety, I think we were able to call those things out when someone got triggered, or when there was a place where there was a misunderstanding or people just disagreed on something. And to have a group that you can be in education with, but also kind of develop some of that empathy and develop some of those conversational skills, right? That capacity to call something out when you don't feel right or comfortable about something. That to me was one of the bigger takeaways, which is I just feel a little stronger in my ability to do that, to notice it, and to be in communion with others where it's possible. And I don't want to undermine. I think that's a really important aspect, and I think that would probably be, in some other better words, one of the goals of the program overall, which is to help us to build our capacity to, like you said, to talk about race. So from that perspective, I felt like we did a really good job with that. Maybe I'll pass over to Alina and see what she wants to share, but those are my initial thoughts.
I love that, the capacity to have these conversations, because really, it's very rare that unless you meet someone in your circles that has been educated in like, how did race actually form, what is actually happening in this realm, right? Like the thought that you would have a mature conversation that doesn't end up in someone getting defensive or like, I don't want to talk to you about this anymore because this is going to cause a fight, very rare. So the ability to have these conversations with preset kind of group communication rules, right? Like, hey, this might create some tension within you, and like when it does, this is what we do, and it's okay. And I think that creates a safer space. So I definitely felt that as well. For me, this was the second time going through the content, because I had gone through it when I took the Game Changer Intensive. And it was definitely like a finally, like this, it very much deserves multiple conversations around the content, because currently how Pachamama has it is that it's bonus. And I remember having like one call over, for the entire piece of content with my small group from Game Changer. And I'm like, that's not enough. It's not a bonus. It's a whole separate program. So that's what we have in essence created here, is like, we've separated it out and we've taken the time to properly, which I think we can still do much more, but like, we've taken the time to discuss it at a larger length, which I think is great.
Thank you.
And yeah.
For those watching the replay, I want to offer a little bit of background, or for anyone who didn't participate. So as Jana mentioned, this program, the JEDI program that we highlighted, was based on the content created by the Pachamama Alliance, and the content is curated. Most of it is articles, YouTube videos, things like that are publicly available online. And so it's not that we took somebody else's content and said ours now. We took their curriculum and giving full credit to the Pachamama Alliance for curating this curriculum. And we separated it out into 5 content-based discussion sessions around particular topics within the idea of this racial equity kind of work. And then prior to those 5 sessions, we also had an introduction session where we went over setting the container, the rules that we're going to work with, and make sure that we're creating a brave space where people can feel safe showing up and having these conversations. And I would say that it took everyone a meeting or two to really settle into, oh, wow, I'm actually starting to feel safe and effective in this space and able to like put myself out there. And it took a little time to get there to be able to do that. And then after the 5 content-based sessions, we also had a wrap-up session where we got ideas and feedback and went over, what worked, what didn't, things like that. And also, what are the next steps? And one of the things that Jana and I were just discussing right before this meeting is kind of what is the next iteration of this program, recognizing that Pachamama's Cost of Whiteness program was created back in 2020, somewhat in reaction to the George Floyd tragedy, and that it hasn't been updated much since then. And that we would love to update the content that we're rolling out to be a bit more proactive, less
Holistic.
reactionary. What was that, Jana?
Holistic.
Yes, a little more holistic, and really encapsulate the feedback that we've been getting from these discussions. That said, I want to offer amazing gratitude and kudos to the Pachamama Alliance for getting this started, because if we had had to create this from scratch, it would have been a monumental undertaking. And so I would love to hear from Brian and Alina and Jana, what piece of content from the Pachamama curated content that we reviewed together was most impactful for you and why? And I know that there might be some hard to choose. Jana.
Yeah, before we go there, I just want to, for those who didn't join us, I'm looking at the titles. We talked about the construct of race. We talked about and explored a little bit more deeply white privilege. We talked about systemic racism. We talked about what does it mean as a white person to become an anti-racist ally. So not performative allyship, not good intention, but what does it actually look like in action? And then we talked about what is the implication of whiteness in our current societal structure.
And within the accounting profession.
And so I think the intention was to talk about it in the accounting profession. And I think we touched on that, but where I think we landed most of this was, and I wrote down here, it gave everybody in the space. I was the only Black person, not the only person of color. There was one other person of color. I won't name names, but everyone else was at least visibly white. And it was helping our participants get comfortable sitting in that discomfort.
Yeah.
Because white racial identity isn't an identity until we call it out.
Mm-hmm.
Race is everything that's not white. And so this was really about calling that out. And Brian, to your point, creating a space. This isn't a brave space. This isn't an uncomfortable space. I think this is a very vulnerable space. And honoring that vulnerability and protecting others when they're in that space, I think we did beautifully. It took us a while to get there. But we got there, and I would love for others to join that conversation, understanding that that is what we were talking about. We were talking about, okay, for white people, what does this mean? And what is the environment that is the result of your actions or inactions? And perceptions, because you also said earlier, we learn this as children, Ingrid? You said that during the grounding. And I thought immediately, it's deeper than that. This is all passed down. This is historical structure, infrastructure. And what we're learning as children is rooted in that infrastructure
Mhm.
and then reinforced. So I'll stop there because I am also curious, for Brian and Alina, what is your most impactful piece of content? And then Matthew, we didn't forget about you. I would love, from what you know about the program, where you're most curious.
I don't remember what this was. It was a podcast and it was talking about how race was formed. And that was really interesting to me. It was talking about the Greeks, right? And how it didn't really have anything to do with blackness necessarily, or like any color or whiteness necessarily. In fact, the Greeks were probably darker, right? And we're saying like, hey, you guys that are pale, like you're sickly, right? You're not well. So it started kind of as a supremacy, like we are better as a culture than you. But then after slavery started to be a thing in Africa, like that is when they had to basically make it okay for like to do that to people, right? It, so I mean, to me, like learning about how that was formed was really transformative. And how that narrative continued forward. That is one thing that I'm thinking of specifically. It's really hard to choose just one. Like
I know, there's
everything
so
is so
many.
impactful in its own way.
Anything rising to the top for you, Brian? Any particular pieces of content that blew your mind?
I mean, it's sort of like Alina said, it's hard for me to pick one. The impact was sort of level or similar in a lot of the categories. I will say, when we were talking about systematic racism, I feel like a couple people brought things up which were a little triggering to others. And I felt like the raising of those issues was really good for the group, and to have to go through that. I also can't help but think, for me, the implication of whiteness, and I don't know if it was in that topic area when we were talking about it, but just the idea, and I think Jenna said it, what is the environment that we are in today based on sometimes white people's inactions, right? And so that always sticks kind of hard with me, because for me personally in my life, I know there are times where I just don't say something when something comes up in a protected group environment type thing. So that's where I truly want to challenge myself. So that was a good topic to hear about, maybe again for me, to realize that what might seem like a smaller group thing has huge implications on our structure and everything that is present for us. So those would be some of the thoughts I had on what stuck out for me. One thing that came up for me when I was listening to listening to maybe something Alina said, is the idea of, you said, Ingrid, what comes next for this group or for this momentum? And I felt like we did sort of stay away from our profession specifically, even though maybe that wasn't the intention, and I actually felt like that was probably a good way for this first go around, but I wonder if that could be a thought. Is there a next round or a next evolution or something that goes further and specifically into our profession with some of these issues, right? I don't know that I would change it and say, hey, maybe we should have gone further with the group in the round we did, because I like where we were and keeping it broader. But that's an idea that comes up for me, which is maybe that's a place we could go to, because I don't think we went there. Yeah.
Yeah, the question was raised on several occasions, and at the same time, a lot of these questions are such big questions. that we don't have the answers to them yet.
Mhm.
We don't even know where to start tackling them. We just keep asking the question until something kind of comes up. I think the tricky thing when we're getting into how do we tackle the issue of justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, belonging within the accounting profession is that ties it right into our personal livelihood and potential threats to, could bringing this up threaten my ability to support my family? Was that Janah's ding, ding, ding?
Well, that was my fear. Literally, I think a week or two
Yeah.
before we launched, I reached out to you, Ingrid, and said, I don't feel comfortable with the title, The Cost of Whiteness, and I'd
Yeah.
like to change it. And that was entirely defensive and reactive to what I was afraid might be. The word gets out somehow and it takes off, because that's how things happen in social media. What seems to be an innocent comment or a thoughtful post is interpreted differently by somebody.
Mhm.
And then that interpretation takes over the narrative.
Yeah.
And there's no opportunity to correct that narrative, because at that point you've lost it. And that's a very real fear, and why a lot of people don't want to participate in things like this.
Yeah.
And I understand that.
So I love that that was actually one of the first conversations we had. Of course, respecting our confidentiality agreements and sharing the learnings, not the names. Getting into some deep conversation around the damage that cancel culture is doing, and really looking at our own processes in relation to the social media dynamics and other dynamics, to ask the question of, how do we invite people into these conversations with an intention to open them up and create opportunities for healing rather than canceling? How do we invite in rather than calling people out?
Matthew, please interrupt anytime when something pops up for you.
Can I jump in?
Yes, please.
So, again, I iterate that I did not have the opportunity to be in the space, and so I'm hearing a lot of this for the first time, and so I want to kind of ground us in actually our values at the AAN, and maybe talk about some of the things that came up as key insights for those of you who went through the experience, right? And so for those of you who don't know or are new to this information, the Accounting Alchemy Network recently finalized a playbook, and the playbook is designed to help new members enter into the community and understand where to start, at what level to start at, and things like what kind of a culture we're aiming to create. And in that culture conversation, there's a piece about values. Right. And the three top values, I'm going to say these, and then I'm going to hone in on one of them in particular, and then talk about one of our permission to play values. The three primary core values are practical, regenerative, and evolution. Right. So I want to come back to the practical one in a second. And I say that because the value of referring to JEDI as a journey, per your comment earlier, Shana, is that the four of you have been on a journey together, and now we're inviting people to take that journey, right? Or to consider taking that journey. And the value of being one of the people that has journeyed ahead of another is that you can say, hey, there's a rock here. You're gonna need to bring a walking stick, right? Like, don't forget to pack an extra, jacket. Exactly, right? You have the ability to give us that practical, going back to that advice on, when you go down this road, here are some things to put into your backpack, right? And so I'm curious about what some of those practical insights are, but I want to frame it in one of the elements in the playbook that we talk about under the category of values is what we consider permission to play values, right? And these are values that we've identified that really, if you're going to be in this community, you have to show some sort of a baseline or a minimum standard around participating in these conversations, right? And one of those core permission to play values is the commitment to being a Jedi supporter or being on this Jedi journey, right? And so knowing that there's a lot of people out there who have not started this journey yet, knowing that this might actually be, at least in the container of the accounting profession, the first time that they're walking down that pathway in a substantive way, and knowing that we have this, frankly, this expectation that there's a permission to play dynamic going on here, what advice do the four of you have for new members of the Accounting Alchemy Network who want to begin this journey but aren't sure what to put in their backpack?
I've been scribbling words down this entire time. And Ingrid, you said ask the question. And I thought, we're trying to figure out what the question is. Okay. We ask a question, then we realize, wait, no, there's another question before that question. And so some of what we did together was, I don't want to call it ideating, because I don't think that's what it is. I think it was exploration around self-awareness for me individually, for us as a community, a collective of people on this Zoom together. And then imagining, although not explicitly talking about it, to your point, Brian, but imagining what this means for me as an accountant and a CPA in this industry. Like, I know I thought about that, even if we didn't explicitly ask the question at the end of every session. So what does this mean for the accounting industry? Like, we didn't do that. But I think that collective self-awareness is something we worked on together. And I found that to be very transformative. Lord knows I went in there thinking I knew what I was doing as the moderator. And I walked out of there thinking, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. But I know better how to not do what the hell I know I'm not doing. And that didn't make any sense, but I think you followed me on that one. I also wrote down, I push back, and I want to come back to that at some point. So I'm just putting that out there as a.
Do you want to hit it now?
I don't know, because I don't know if others wanted to address and speak to what Matthew was just talking about.
Yeah, I guess. So acknowledging that justice, equity, diversity, inclusion is one of our minimum standards in the accounting profession. And I want to kind of delve into that a little bit more deeply, acknowledging that when we have it as a minimum standard, that's not to say that everyone in the Accounting Alchemy Network needs to be a Jedi Master, because once again, like we were saying before, there are no Jedi Masters. We all have learning to do. It's that we are endeavoring to do the learning. And I loved so many of the conversations that came up within the space that we were creating, because we were able to acknowledge our Padawan noviceness in these experiences, even if we've been doing this work for years. It's this perpetual peeling the onion, unfolding journey of recognizing how much more there will always be that we need to know. And it is very much an internal self-exploration journey. The main thing is that if someone is, looking into the Accounting Alchemy Network and they're coming into the Accounting Alchemy Network with, oh, all that diversity, equity, inclusion stuff, that's a bunch of compliance, what a load of bunk.
Ooh.
We don't need that. And, or people who are outright racist, I don't want to hang out with those people. That creates unsafe space that is unwelcoming, where people don't get to feel belonging. And that's not what we're cultivating in the Accounting Alchemy Network. But for anyone who has even the curiosity to explore these topics and to learn how to be more effective in these discussions, having the interest and the curiosity, that is where it's a permission to play value. And there's so much work that we can be doing. And I loved how many of the members stepping into these conversations were stepping into it from I've never done this before. I'm interested. I don't want to be a racist. I don't want to be part of the problem. And I am so afraid of doing harm that I just keep my mouth shut and I don't start. Is this really a place where I can come in as someone brand new to this conversation and make the mistakes that need to be made in order to learn and grow? And the answer is yes. That is exactly what we did.
Mm.
And it was amazing. And I guess that kind of leads to sort of the next question of really wanting to hear some of the most profound learnings for each of you, Brian, Jana, Alina, and also Matthew, from the work that you've done in these learning experiences. Of course, recognizing, once again, share the learnings, not the names. I guess for me, just to get the ball rolling, one of the rules that we have within these spaces is what we call oops and ouch,
Mhm.
which creates a space. And this was learned from the Pachamama Alliance. This is one of the Pachamama Alliance's recommended rules in these conversations. Creates a space where we're allowed to make mistakes and talk about them. That if we
Or
get
not.
these conversations, or not, like, we can opt
Yeah.
in. Everything is a consent conversation. We can engage in these. And I had an experience of an oops in a Pachamama discussion, actually prior to this JEDI training, where we're talking about all of the different words around these ideas and talking about white privilege and things like that. And here we're talking about white privilege, and we were also talking about other terms. And when I meant to say white privilege, what came out of my mouth in that moment was white supremacy. And I'm like, oops, that was not what I meant to say. Rewind, back up. And we were able to laugh it off.
But let me say this, Ingrid, before
Yeah.
anyone's listening, we were able to laugh it off because we had shared rules of engagement.
Yes.
And that we had all acknowledged that the moment you say oops, I honor the oops.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, what happens in these rooms, and this is why we find it so difficult to have these conversations, somebody says, that's not what I meant. And somebody else is going, no, that's exactly what she meant. And then they're holding the grudge silently and privately while continuing to engage in a way that is not authentic to that moment and to that exchange and to that discussion. And the oops outs rule. And we saw a couple members at certain points say, ouch. And that's and the point of that rule, and what makes it so important for folks is that all you have to do is say it. We don't have to talk about it unless the person saying oops or the person saying ouch wants to explore it more. Otherwise, you get to say ouch, and we saw it happen. And people just continue to listen, but we now knew they were in a more fragile state.
Well, and
that was so powerful about that.
Yeah. And when it happens, we give the opportunity to check in and say, do you want to say more? Thank you for speaking up. And I would say that the conversations that begin with ouch were some of the most profound learning experiences. Absolutely amazing and beautiful. And the level of vulnerability and depth and learning that we all got from someone stepping outside their comfort zone to say, actually, that right there, that hurt me. And it gave us the chance to do the healing in real time. And that was so beautiful and so profound and amazing. And from the oops perspective, it's one thing to acknowledge my white privilege. It's another thing to acknowledge my white supremacy. No. So yeah, I guess with that, I love the oops and the ouch. And I would love to hear, what are some of the other really profound learning experiences? What were some of the moments that really stepped out and shone for each of you?
I wrote down that I pushed back because for me, I think it wasn't until our 4th session, actually, which would have been the intro and then 30 sessions. It was very hard to do the math on which session we were in, but I started to notice in real time the tendency, as we talked about white racial identity, to move out of the discomfort into more comfortable spaces. And it become about, well, these are what my intentions are, and this is what I think. And I'm like, no. Let's go back to the uncomfortable part where your intentions aren't the point here. The point is understanding the impact of where you are and how we got here. And especially when it came to conversations around white privilege. And when I noticed it, I was then able to call it out and bring us back to it. Not in a way that was judgy, at least I hope not, but in a way that said, wait, time out, we've drifted, let's come back. I don't think I would have learned how to do that, and I certainly don't think I would have noticed it in that way were it not for this series, because we've all been involved in conversations around race. And what I've experienced every time was at some point along the way, that does happen. I don't recognize it. I don't have a name for it. And when that happens, I'm just like, yeah, here we go again. And then I'm done. Like, and there are a lot of people of color who would not want to, and we know did not want to participate in this series because of that very thing. Because a person of color doesn't have the option to step away from a white world.
Mm-hmm.
We are surrounded by this and we are present and aware of it at all times in ways that people who are white aren't consciously present and aware of race because they don't have to be. And so trying to create that presence and awareness in a way that is safe and that honors the discomfort of that is something I feel like I've begun to learn how to do as a result of this. And I'm grateful for this because otherwise I would have been a person of color that was doing the, oh, here we go again. And not necessarily having a name for that either.
Yeah.
I'm doing it without knowing that I'm doing it. So that was a really big takeaway. And I noticed that moment and I was secret internally and like experienced gratitude in real time for that.
Thank you. I want to just unfold a little bit more on what you were saying around other people of color not joining us for this experience, and just to fill people in watching the replay and who weren't part of the conversation. This first pilot program was a invite only curated list of people that I was confident could handle having these conversations, because Jana and I were a little nervous stepping into facilitating this experience for the first time and not knowing how it was going to go, and wanting to make sure that we had people in the room who could had the capacity to do this at the high level that we were wanting to do. And I invited quite a few people of color to these conversations, and most of them basically responded with, thank you for doing this. And this is not a conversation that I have the emotional capacity to be involved in right now.
Yeah.
And totally respecting and honoring that very beautiful, important choice. And it reminds me actually of one of my favorite pieces of content from the Pachamama curated content. I forget the speaker's name. I would have to look it up. This amazing Black woman talking about allyship. And she's sharing this analogy of unpacking a truck full of boxes. And, you know, if she's been unpacking this truck full of boxes for a really long time, there is, you know, something to be said for the people who are acknowledging that work that is being done and saying, oh, wow, look at that. That is great work. And, you know, watching and cheering on and saying, great work. Thank you for doing that work. There, oh, and Janelle just put it in the chat. Dr. Evelyn Carter, yes, from awareness to action, the path toward meaningful allyship. The next level beyond the recognition of the work being done is, here, let me help. I'm going to get into the truck with you and I'm going to start carrying some frickin' boxes. And how important that is to start taking the action. And then there's the real acknowledgement of the big work that's being done, watching the people who are carrying those boxes and saying, hey, you've been doing that for a long time. Here's a chair, a glass of water. Let me take over for a bit. You sit down. I've got this. And that is where the real meaningful allyship steps in. And just wanting to express from my heart my gratitude for the people of color who even acknowledge the invitation to join us in this conversation. And thank you for all of the work that you are doing on a daily basis that you don't get to put down.
Yeah.
because of our societal constructs and
And the composition of our industry.
yeah, and of our industry, and wanting to let you know, hey, this work is happening and it's okay that you're not here in the room with us. And you are welcome here if you ever want to join the conversation. So
But we
yeah.
are doing the work.
We are doing the work.
We're the
We
ones
are
that are so
committed to doing this work.
And this group facilitates the how do you go start picking up those boxes?
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. That was a great video. I would encourage anyone to, it's a long video, but there is a very good section in there where she talks about that part of the allyship in that example. And I wish I knew what minute mark to send people to, because I think the Pachamama Alliance says from this minute to that minute.
It might be in our PDF. We could look at that session, but yeah.
But yeah.
Brian, Alina, any profound learnings that you'd like to share?
I will say one very personal learning, and now in reflecting on the whole program that I had, and maybe something Jenna said makes me feel like I have better words to describe it now, is that, you know, there were things that came up in session 1 or 2 where I was slightly triggered and I did not say anything. I even regretted it afterwards. I even talked about it with my business partner, and then in session 3 or 4, something similar would come up, and I would say something, or the group had said it, and it's not about me; it's about it coming up. And I felt like that was real good. I don't want to say learning; that was like growing for me, right? Because there's things that when you get triggered, and you might have a steps you can take to make sure you do what you should do in that situation, right? And you can know those things in your brain, but you don't learn them until you do them in your body and you actually act on something. So I remember it was one of our later sessions where we kind of came to that conclusion together, and that was amazing, that the group had increased its capacity to, I don't want to say call each other out, but to call out discomfort, to lean into the discomfort. And I feel like I'm a better, stronger person now because of that. So that was a really cool thing, because I feel like now I would not have had that very physical practice if I didn't go through this program. One other thing that comes up to me, and also in listening to Matthew and Ingrid, and that is, I wonder though, if I'm a little worried about these baseline values that are important, that I love the values, but when I think about what this program needs, is we need people eventually, at least, to be in this program that might feel like there's no such thing as white privilege, or that struggle with a lot of this. So how are we going to be able to attract that and reconcile that with saying, hey, this is a baseline value, which I feel like that could detract from some people wanting to even entertain the idea of being a part of something like this. So I just wanted to call that out, because that was coming up for me as I was hearing you all talk about things that are almost like baseline for people to want to join. Yep.
I really appreciate that. Thank you, Brian, for voicing that. And yeah, we do want to create opportunities to have people step into these conversations, to invite them into the conversation wherever we're starting. And that's one of the things that Jana and I were just talking about, as like, you know, what does this program look like moving forward? Of, you know, creating, there was definitely some deep value had in sinking into a regular meeting space with a cohort of people where it's the same people each time, and trust has been built, and where we can open up those deeper levels of those conversations. And there's also something to be said for then taking those learnings out to a more public venue that we can record for replay on YouTube, and to invite others who weren't part of those discussions into this discussion, so that we can apply those new skills with people in voicing those things on a deeper level, and acknowledging that we're all in different places. And how do we give people that hand up to be able to acknowledge our white privilege and to be able to take a look from new perspectives, because that's really what it is that we're looking at things from different angles, different lenses. And the first time we are able to see our own privilege is a transformative emotional experience, and it's not a comfy one. It's a big moment. And for anyone who hasn't had that moment yet, inviting you into this conversation to be able to do that in a way where you won't be judged for acknowledging your privilege. And, it's an epiphany. So thank you for bringing up the need to reach people in that way. And I would love to hear if you have any ideas or suggestions on how to create that inviting space where people might be open to doing that work for the first time.
I think that's the epitome of what I call the DEI catch-22. We live in this myth of a post-racial society. I mean, we had a Black president, so, racism is done. And yet the constructs are there that date all the way back to the creation of the very society that we live in. And if we don't understand those constructs, then what we do, we look at today, we take it out of context and believe all of this to just be a manifestation of intention. And since I have no intention to be racist, since I don't see color, actually hurt. I didn't mean to actually hurt myself just now. Therefore, I can't be racist. And that is what we had to break through to start having conversations around this. And so people who start to have those conversations are like, wow, this is a great conversation. Wish I'd had it sooner. Those are some of the same people that when we tried to invite you to have it earlier, you didn't want to have it. So that's what I mean by the catch-22, because once people get into these conversations, the feedback is almost always, I know this is with my clients, wow, this is great. I wish we had provided more time for this. When the day before, people are like, do I really have to go do that conversation? Do I really have to go do that training? I don't want to do that training. And then they're through the training and like, wow, I wish I had known. Well, how do you convince somebody that there's no guarantee you're going to feel this way, but our experience tells us that when we start having these kinds of conversations, they're good. It's like, how do you get your kids to eat spinach? And then they realize they like the spinach. And I don't know, Brian, I can't talk to you, Alina, because you already bought in. So Brian, how, from your experience, what was it, if I don't want to put you on the spot, so it's okay to say, I'm not sure, let me think about it. Where you go from seeing this description of a series and being open to now participating in it. Because there's a leap to take there.
Right. And actually, when I was making this decision, it was actually a point in my life where I was trying to be really intentional about saying no to more things. Mm-hmm. So you caught me at a time where I was really trying to build those muscles of no, except for the big important things that matter in my life. And so
thank you for making this a priority. That's huge.
So to get to Jenna's question of what made me say yes, it was a person. So it was my partner, Sarah, mentioning it, wanting to do it. And she knew that I might have an interest in it. She didn't know where I was in terms of my no muscles. And she gave me the space to kind of figure out in a little bit of time my priorities and what was going on. And I realized I only want to say yes if I'm all in, and all those things, right, that we should be doing when we make commitments to do things. And I just think it was her convincing me based on what she knew about me and what would matter to me. So she influenced in a positive way. And that's what I can't help. And now it really rings home because you asked the question. I made it personal with my example. I did it because a person asked me to do it. A person who I care about and who I and who matters to me, and who, we hold some similar things about what we think the profession needs to change. But that was what put me over the top. And it was very close to not being over the top. And when I think about some of the people that maybe said no to this, or that, we want to include, I think about the idea of doing similar things, right? And I realize that's a lot of labor or work, but making those personal requests to do this, that would be just one idea that came up from one of the earlier things we asked, which is how do we, do this? So yeah, I hope that answers your question, Jenna, and shares the idea of, I think some of this needs to be very personalized to make it happen, which sounds hard when you're trying to attract a lot of people, but it also, I know it worked for me, and I bet it could work for some others. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, it sounded like it was, you knew the person who asked you and she understood your why. The context of your why is more important than the context of our what. And I think that that might be our takeaway there, Ingrid, if we think about it, that. And then to your point, Matthew, these are the values of the community. It is presumed that you share this belief. And so the JEDI principles, we're just assuming that you share a commitment to them. And so based on that assumption, we can then speak to some of those whys and joining us in the journey so that you can join in those whys exploration and better, deeper understanding of. And then the hows and the whats are almost incidental. And I don't know if that might, I'm thinking out loud now because of what you said, Brian. It wasn't just that she asked, but she knew you. And not just because she knew you like, oh, I know Brian, he's a great guy, but she knew what matters to you and what you value. I think we all share, in my work here, I learned that, yeah, okay, there's an occasional a-hole. I can't say can I say the whole word? There's an occasional jerk, but they are the exception. And the rule is people mean well, have good intentions, have the so-called blind spots. Most of us live in communities of people who look like us, whichever the look is. And we don't live in diverse communities. Most Americans don't. So a lack of exposure is where we end up with this gap, because we all have the good intention. So how do we tap into? Cough, cough. I'm doing the cough, cough, Alina, because you put it in the.
I think you're onto something there, because I'm not thinking about this specific conversation, but I'm thinking about how I got into being a part of the Accounting Alchemy Network. I was not a part of the initial conversations of formation of this network. I was roped in later, and I would not say that activism was high on my values list. If anything, I'm like, no, I'm staying away from that. Like, that is not conversations I care to have, because people getting upset, all these things. I don't watch the news, etc. I still don't really do that, but I am much more aware. And yes, I care about Ingrid and Matthew, and they were sharing. I mean, what matters to me is connection. What matters to me is everybody being well. What matters to me is love. Like, those are high on my values list. So, and I was curious. Curiosity is high on my values list too. I think that's really important too. Because if I had I don't know that I was at the position of racism doesn't exist. That was not me then, but I was definitely like, I'm not a racist. Like, and I would be triggered if someone called me a racist, which I see differently now. And like, but I had interest. I was like, okay, I know it exists. I know that it's a problem. I don't know what the hell I could do about it. I don't know what I could do about any of this, honestly, unless I go try and pick it with signs and stuff, and I don't want to do that. So it was literally like, I'll just watch these videos and see what happens. And then at that point, it's like, oh my God, there's so much more that unlocks. So, and I'm not just talking about the stuff that we did together with JEDI. I'm talking about Game Changer Intensive from as a whole. So
If I can jump on what you just said, you said you see, you wouldn't have said you're a racist. You see that differently. What I want to invite people to think about for future conversation series, if we do this again, not if, when we do this again, is that not only do you see it differently if somebody, what is the definition of a racist? We see it from both sides. So the person who says you are a racist now understands what that means to say it, and likely won't say it again from this perspective of a generic definition, what we see on the headlines, racist. Because we now know that word is so much more complex while simultaneously very, very simple. And somebody won't take offense from being called a racist if they understand what that means and sees it as a comment around structure, positioning, privilege, and all of these things. We explored this together in this series, in this conversation series, so that we can really get to a place where we can talk about it. Because if I go around calling somebody a racist, I'm just as much as part of the problem until I really understand what that means and what saying that means.
yeah, I had, just to share, when you guys were asking about big learnings, there was a quote that I wrote down from Ajoma Aluo, and she was saying the beauty of anti-racism is that you don't have to pretend to be free of racism to be anti-racist. Anti-racism is the commitment to fight racism wherever you find it, including in yourself, and it's the only way forward. Meaning she has racism tendencies because it's literally subconsciously a part of our culture. Like, it's been programmed within us, and we don't even know all the layers that we have, each of us has. Another quote was like, racism-free upbringing is not possible because racism is a social system embedded in the culture and its institutions, by Robin DiAngelo. So it's like, yeah, I don't know what I don't know. And yeah.
Thank you
Thank you.
so
Those are
much.
amazing quotes.
Yes. So I want to acknowledge that we've got just 10 minutes left. And I have a couple more, like, just big mind-blowing questions, mostly pertaining to what, if anything, do you plan to do differently following this JEDI experience? And what recommendations might you have for others who are thinking of learning more about these topics and thinking about embarking on this JEDI journey?
I can tell you it motivated me to finally make time to write my book. It's not directly related to this, but I have come to really understand the whole, what I talked about earlier, the myth of a post-racial society. Like, what does that actually mean more deeply? And as well as internalization of race and racism for people of color in particular. And as I've spent more time as a result of this work, reading, researching, and understanding it has really changed some of my thinking to the point where, okay, I think I'm ready to write about this stuff. Because I feel like this program and just the siege cost of the Pachamama content overall has given me a vocabulary, has given me a broader, more universal view of this. And that's really important. And by the way, to your point, Alina, I heard, Ingrid, you invited me, I don't know how many times, to the Game Changer Intensive. Curiosity is what got me there. And absolutely tapping into, wow, that is validation and explanation of things that I'd felt but hadn't articulated and expressed, has kept me here. And now I'm trapped and I can't get out. But yeah. So I'm here and I'm doing this work now. Awareness sucks, can I just say? Because once you're self-aware, you got to do something about it or live in denial.
Sorry, not sorry.
Yeah, for me, oh, Ingrid, were you going to say something?
No, I was gonna say, oh, Alina's off mute.
Oh, I was just going to say I'm going to continue to do this work. And, I wrote some questions down here. This is a question I ask in general, but specifically when it comes to the systems in our country and the world. We've been made to believe things are true that are not. So that the system is perpetuated. And I would be curious who benefits and how does that work? Like, why are these systems still a thing? Those are questions that I'm asking, and also ask other people just as a curiosity. And then as far as advice for anyone who hasn't gotten involved, get involved. Like, come to our next trainings or get involved with the Pachamama Alliance. They have incredible learning opportunities.
Can I just jump in and, again, I want to kind of summarize some of my questions in the chat, right? So a lot of the challenges that we face in enrolling people in any of the work at the Accounting Alchemy Network has to do with time, right? And capacity to participate. And so I guess knowing that I don't know what I don't know about this work, and yet knowing what I do know about the work generally that we do as an organization and as a community AAN, like, and this might be a question, but why actually I think any one of you might be able to answer this. I don't know if you could, Brian. It's like, do we recommend people do GCI before they do JEDI? And subsequent, like, that's one question from a very functional new member perspective. It's like, should I go this route or should I go this route? Right. And then the other question I have, I think this goes back to what you were saying, Brian, about the permission to play piece. I think curiosity is sort of the driving force, it seems like, for everyone in this group, and I think for the community at large. There's a curiosity to want to know, to want to go down the path, and also I acknowledge that, like, some of the people in our community might be the first ones who really want to have this conversation in their practice, right? Take it from here into their company. And so what sort of words of wisdom do you have for members who are looking at this program as a way of igniting that conversation inside of their firm? Yeah, those are my two questions.
I think we all stereotype these very conversations. And I would say, Alina, what you just said is perfect. Just come. What's the worst that can happen? It exactly meets your expectations and you leave. That is the worst case scenario. But what I would hope happen is you come and then you realize, maybe there's more to this than I realized. And then you stick around. That's what I would invite everybody to do, because all of the change any of us have experienced individually didn't come because we kept doing the same thing. All of our growth, all of our learning, every time I challenged my own assumptions is because I was in a situation where somebody showed me that there might be just a slightly different way to look at this. And I took it from there. So what do you have to lose but an hour?
Yeah. Well, and I think also recognizing that for people looking to bring these ideas to their firms, to their clients, recognizing that this journey starts with each of us doing the internal work and showing up as the change that we want to see in the world. Which means that before we can roll it out to our firm, we need to show up to do the work ourselves. And that when we start practicing this work, it starts to show up in our lives. And that creates the opportunity to have the conversation with our families, with our coworkers and teammates, with our clients. Yeah. And it makes it so that we can start to establish our own permission to play values. I mean, I'm thinking right now of how many of the accountants that I work with in my coaching practice are still taking on clients that are not in alignment with their own personal permission to play values, because they feel like they have to sacrifice those permission to play values on the altar of profit in order to survive in today's crazy world. But yet, when we start to prioritize our values and live those values, we attract to us the people who share our values. And we are able to create the livelihood that we want to create while living our values with the people who share them. And that creates a rising tide that raises all ships and expands outward to reach the people who maybe aren't there yet, recognizing that for many, one of the reasons why they don't share those values is because they haven't had the opportunity to heal whatever ancestral trauma was passed on to them of racism, capitalism, colonialism. All of these things are things that can be healed. And when we release the judgment, we create opportunities to reach people when they're ready. And it starts within each of us. I see, Jana, you're putting stuff in the chat. Do you want to just speak to it?
Well, I just said, you talked about, this gives us the opportunity to have these conversations. And I thought before opportunity, we have to have the capacity.
Yeah.
So this muscle, Brian, you said the no muscles, I'm going to keep that one, right? The no muscles. We have to practice the discomfort of being in these conversations. Otherwise, the minute we're triggered, we run. So I have to learn how to stay present in the trigger. It's the work I do. I mean, that's what I talk about in every one of my sessions. I slip that in somewhere.
Hardcore
When we do
resilience
that,
right
then-
there.
When we do that, then the opportunities that come before us, I'm willing to take advantage of them.
Yeah.
And then I thought you said getting past the limited beliefs. We don't even know we have limited beliefs. We just have beliefs.
Yeah.
And so understanding that that belief might be limited, heavily influenced by
Oh, you're
something.
muted, Brian. You said something.
I was just going to say, we don't even know that they're beliefs. We just
Yes.
think they're how the world
They
is.
just are. Yeah. So all we're talking about here is exploring all of that together in a safe, trusted, vulnerable space.
Yeah. Well, I feel like that is a pretty amazing mic drop moment, Jana, to sort of wrap us up on. Any final thoughts in our last minute? Any just like, do we want to leave off with just a one-word takeaway from each person, or any other requests before we wrap up? My word is gratitude. Thank you so much to each of you for being here and doing this work together. And I will pass it to Matthew because I saw you just unmuted for a moment.
Yeah, gratitude as well. And I will just say, for those of you watching, if you're curious, go to our website. We'll put the information in the description below. We heavily encourage you to come into our network, get familiar with it through the playbook, and then pay attention to your newsletter, because that is the primary way that we spread the word about these programs. And we know that this is a program we're prioritizing in 2024. So please tune in now, get plugged in. Yeah, thank you. And with that, I'll return it back to you, Ingrid.
Pass it. Who's next?
Okay. Brian, over to you.
Yeah, I'll just say someone said something that made me think of this quote, and I think it's Babe Ruth. It says, "Never let the fear of striking out keep you from playing the game." We need a lot of people in the game. Alina, go ahead.
I'm just excited for the opportunity of what's going to come next year and in the years to come. Like what other conversations we're going to have, what voices we'll have in the room. Jana?
Yeah, Brian, you made me think of one of the quotes that pops up for me often is, obstacles are only something you see when you lose sight of your goals. And that's powerful for me because what's important for you, you head toward, and the obstacles, you jump around them, you move, you don't even think about it. You just figure out how to get around them. And then the other one I thought about is, you can't hate something if you're curious about it. I would invite people watching to just be a little curious. And like I said, join us. And the worst that'll happen is nothing. but the best that'll happen is change.
Positive change. Yeah.
Positive change. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you all so much for being here, and thanks to anyone watching the replay. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions. And yes, join us. Watch the replay of the playbook if you've got any questions about what the Accounting Alchemy Network is and what we're doing here, our theory of change, and how you can get involved. And please join us for the next round of the Game Changer Intensive with the Pachamama Alliance, because we are doing those programs fairly frequently whenever Pachamama offers them. And it's a great place to get started if you feel like you're not quite ready for a full-on JEDI training conversation. Game Changer is a really good intro step. So thanks so much to everyone for being here and doing this work. Bye.